Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a place where the air is thin, the views are absurdly dramatic, and the emperors hold ceremonies so high up you'd need a mule, a monk, and a miracle to reach them. Welcome to the roof of Africa, medieval Ethiopia, where royal power wasn't just divine, it was practically airborne. You find yourself standing at the base of a sheer cliff, gazing up at an impossibly high plateau, cloaked in mist. The birds soaring above you look like dots against the sun. Somewhere up there, past the rock ledges and the cloud line, is a chapel, a throne, and maybe, if you're lucky, a warm place to sit that isn't made of stone. Ethiopia doesn't play by the usual medieval script. While Europe was busy arguing about whose armor was shinier, Ethiopian emperors were busy climbing mountains, literally, to legitimize their rule. The land of ancient Axum had long merged faith and geography, and nowhere was that more evident than in their habit of conducting imperial ceremonies in remote mountaintop strongholds. You, poor traveler, are about to make the ascent. And no, there's no coffee shop halfway up, though oddly, this is where coffee was born. Irony, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to know who else is tuning in from under the covers at 2 a.m. or is secretly listening during lunch break at work. We won't tell your boss. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your trek from the lowlands, trudging through a landscape that shifts from dusty brown to soft green as the path tilts steadily upward. It's early morning. The sun hasn't burned off the fog yet, and your breath fogs in the cool air. With every step, you feel the altitude thicken around your chest. The birds here chirp less like tweety friends and more like judgmental cousins. By midday, you reach a resting point. Villagers wave as you pass, murmuring blessings in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language still used in Ethiopian Orthodox churches. One old man offers you a handful of roasted barley, a peasant snack once shared by farmers and emperors alike. It's dry, but you're too tired to care. Your feet are dust-caked and sore. Welcome to the real royal experience, blisters, altitude sickness, and barley in your teeth. Now, look up. That's Debredemo ahead, flat-topped 2,200 meters above sea level and only accessible by climbing a rope. Yes, a rope. Not a staircase, not a switchback, just a leather strap hanging from a cliff. Historians still argue whether this method was an act of divine humility or a low-key hazing ritual for royalty. Either way, you're not going up without help. But before the climb, let's appreciate the view. You're surrounded by highland ridges that roll like waves, dotted with thatched huts and stone granaries. In the far distance, the Tigray region stretches like a tapestry of browns, golds, and shadowy greens. The wind carries the faint scent of eucalyptus and distant wood smoke. A donkey brays, and it sounds like it has a personal vendetta. Eventually, you reach a small base camp, a cluster of stone huts inhabited by scribes, guards, and one terrifyingly spry elderly nun who can climb the rope faster than any soldier. She gives you a look that says, "Don't embarrass yourself." And frankly, you might. You tug on the rope. It creaks. The leather is worn smooth by centuries of ascents. Every emperor since the 6th century who came to Debredemo did this. Even Emperor Gebre Meskel is said to have made the climb barefoot, just to prove he was tough enough to lead. And because, let's face it, medieval emperors weren't exactly known for sensible footwear. As you ascend, awkwardly, slowly, with lots of prayer and one near slip, you start to understand the point of it all. Being an emperor here wasn't about luxury, it was about endurance. If you couldn't haul yourself up a 15-meter cliff to your own coronation, did you even deserve the crown? Reaching the top, you collapse on the grass like a sack of yams. Around you, flat earth stretches across the mountaintop like an open-air courtyard. There are no palaces, just silence, scattered stone buildings, and the low chant of monks drifting from a chapel carved straight into the rock. This is where the emperor will pray. This is where he'll eat. This is where he might, depending on the politics of the day, be crowned or imprisoned. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this altitude, the sky feels closer. The clouds drift beneath you. and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbles, a reminder that even emperors can't control the weather. You're still catching your breath when a soft jangle breaks the quiet. Bells. Not from goats, though they're around here too. No, these are ceremonial bells, hanging from the necks of robed attendants pacing the plateau with practiced solemnity. You realize this mountaintop isn't just a retreat, it's a stage, and the emperor is the main act, whether he's ready or not. Debre Damo isn't the only sacred peak used for imperial rites. There's Amba Geshen, the fortress mountain that cradled both kings and their potential rivals, and Mount Entoto, favored in later centuries for its misty views over what would become Addis Ababa. What all these places had in common was isolation and majesty, because nothing says, God wants me to rule, like holding your ceremony closer to heaven than anyone else. The concept wasn't just poetic, it was political. Ethiopian emperors claimed descent from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which, if true, made them divine royalty by default. So, naturally, their coronations had to be staged not in urban centers, but on lonely, wild summits where heaven felt close enough to brush with a sleeve. You're handed a robe, scratchy wool, dyed in traditional hues of burnt red and ochre. The color signifies humility before God, though the embroidery says otherwise. Golden thread winds around your arms in patterns of lions, crosses, and wheat. You look like a fancy rug with legs, but a respected one. There's no throne here, not in the way you'd expect. No marble steps or jewel-encrusted cushions, just a flat rock, smoothed by centuries of royal rear ends. This is the emperor's seat, at least for today. Tomorrow, the same spot might serve as a pulpit, or a napping place for the resident cat, whom no one dares move. Nearby, a group of priests kneel beneath a carved archway, singing in Ge'ez. Their voices rise and fall like the wind, each note vibrating in the thin air. It's hypnotic. The ceremony has begun, not with fanfare, but with chant, incense, and stillness. A boy appears holding a cross taller than himself, carved from sycamore and glinting with embedded gems. He leads a slow procession of clergy across the plateau. No one hurries. Time bends here, slowed by altitude and reverence. Now, remember how this all looks from below. Villagers watching from the valley can barely make out the figures on the mountaintop. They don't need to see the details. The symbolism is enough. Their emperor, up high, above the clouds, communing with God, even if he's also sneaking glances at the goat stew being stirred over a fire nearby. Historians still argue whether these mountaintop rites originated with early Christian emperors, or were a continuation of older pre-Christian traditions. Some say the rituals echoed Aksumida's sun ceremonies. Others claim they were entirely a creation of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Either way, it worked. The image of a ruler seated above the world, cloaked in mist and scripture, became etched into Ethiopia's imperial identity. You wander toward the edge of the cliff. Don't worry, you stop well before it gets dramatic. From here, the valleys stretch endlessly, a mix of farmland, villages, and zigzagging footpaths etched like veins across the hills. The sky is brighter up here, thinner too. Even your thoughts feel like they weigh less. One of the monks hands you a cup of tella, a homemade barley beer brewed by the locals for special occasions. It's sour, slightly fizzy, and probably wasn't meant to be consumed before noon, but you're not arguing. Tradition has its perks. Meanwhile, the emperor, barefoot now, symbolizing humility, steps toward the chapel for a private prayer. The priest anoints his head with oil made from frankincense resin. It's said the scent reaches heaven faster from this height. Whether that's theology or just clever PR, no one seems to mind. A royal attendant spreads a goatskin mat before the emperor's stone seat. This is his moment of stillness, where he listens to scripture and contemplates the burden of rule, or possibly wonders if his ceremonial wig is on straight. There's no mirror up here, only God, goats, and gravity. You sit, too, just off to the side, letting the breeze tickle your ears. It carries with it the sound of a distant horn, another mountain, perhaps, echoing the news of the coronation across the highlands. Messages are shared here not through messengers but through echoes, a kind of royal game of telephone, except with drums, horns, and smoke signals. As the ritual continues, more people emerge from small stone buildings, scribes with scrolls, guards in cotton armor, even a cook holding a ladle like a scepter. Life up here isn't just symbolic, it's real, bustling, human. Though, let's be honest, there's probably a little less bustle at 2,600 meters above sea level. The ceremony ends not with applause, but with a slow circling of the mountain's edge, 3 times clockwise, as is tradition. The emperor does it first, then the clergy, then you, clutching your robe like a windswept burrito. By sunset, the sky bleeds orange and purple. The mountaintop glows in fading light. Below, the valleys dim, candles are lit in the chapel. The emperor steps inside one last time. Tomorrow he'll descend, carefully and with much less dignity than when he arrived. But tonight, this mountain belongs to him. The sun hasn't even risen yet, and already you're regretting your choices. You're perched at the edge of a ledge, looking up at the only way forward, a thick, worn leather strap hanging down the side of a cliff, swaying ever so slightly in the wind. This is how you ascend to the sacred summit of Debri Damo. And no, there's no backup ladder, or rope harness, or emotional support animal. You reach out and grip the strap. It's smooth from centuries of use, scented faintly of oil, sweat, and possibly sanctified goat. You pull. It holds. That's comforting. What's less comforting is the realization that you'll need your arms more than your legs. The monks don't climb up this way for the thrill. It's just the only route. As you start the slow, nerve-jangling haul up the rock face, a voice drifts down from above. It's a monk, shouting encouragement, or instructions, or possibly warnings. You can't tell. He's speaking Tigrinya. Either way, his tone suggests you've got this. You do not feel like you've got this. This leather strap method of entry is not new. It's been the only way into Debre Damo since the 6th century, when Saint Aragawi allegedly scaled it with the help of a large friendly serpent. Historians still argue whether that serpent was metaphorical or just a very cooperative python. Regardless, you're fresh out of snakes, so it's the rope for you. Finally, breathless and likely several inches taller from sheer spine-stretching tension, you reach the top. A hand reaches down and hauls you over the final ledge. You collapse onto the plateau, face first in a patch of dusty grass, wheezing like an old accordion. One monk nods at you approvingly. Another offers you a water. A third asks if you lost a sandal halfway up. You did. It's fine. Who needs dignity? The reward for your climb is immediate. Before you, the mountaintop spreads out like a secret world, a series of stone structures, some low and square, others domed and echoing with the faint hum of chanting. Goats wander freely. Bees drift lazily between patches of herbs. A child runs past holding something that looks suspiciously like a ceremonial spoon. And there, not far off, stands the emperor's guest hut. Modest by palace standards, but richly painted in earth tones, its doorway framed by carved cypress wood. The guards outside are dressed in cotton tunics with broad belts, and they eye you in the way only high-altitude bodyguards can, like they're ready to throw you off the cliff if necessary, but would rather not. Inside the hut, a courtier briefs you on today's plan. There's a ceremonial blessing, a visit to the chapel, and, later, a very steep walk to the mountain's far edge, where the emperor is scheduled to greet the horizon in poetic silence. Apparently, it's a whole thing. But for now, you have another challenge: ceremonial footwear. A pair of goat leather sandals waits beside your stool, tied with what can only be described as the medieval equivalent of yarn spaghetti. They are historically accurate, deeply uncomfortable, and completely unsuited for rock climbing. You strap them on anyway. As the sun climbs higher, so do the voices. A liturgy begins near the chapel, the sound of clapping sticks joining the chanting in perfect rhythm. The air smells of incense and wild thyme. You stand among the emperor's entourage, watching as he emerges from his tent, freshly robed and entirely unfazed by the altitude. His crown is modest, more symbolic than flashy, just a circlet of gold and woven silk, said to be soaked in holy water before every mountaintop use. He nods at the assembled crowd. The ceremony begins. You follow the procession as it winds through narrow stone paths, edged by ancient acacia trees. Some are gnarled and hollow, older than any dynasty. A deacon waves a fan made of ostrich feathers. Another sprinkles rose water. The emperor moves slowly, hands lifted, sandals barely whispering on the ground. At the chapel he kneels. A priest dabs his forehead with scented oil. Another recites verses from the Book of Enoch, a text long preserved in Ethiopian tradition, but lost to many other parts of the Christian world. Scholars debate whether these rites came from a single source, or blended centuries of Aksumite, Solomonic, and early Christian rituals into something uniquely Ethiopian. Whatever the origin, the effect is spellbinding. You stand beside a carved window, looking out over the cliffside as the emperor chants. Somewhere below, clouds gather. A hawk circles above. The ground hums with quiet reverence. Or maybe that's just your pulse finally slowing. Later, as the crowd disperses for midday rest, you explore the surrounding buildings. Many are centuries old, patched with straw and mud, their stone walls painted with religious murals. In one, a monk shows you a parchment scroll the length of a dinner table, handwritten, illuminated with gold leaf, and faintly stained by rain. It details an earlier coronation on this very mountain, including an account of a sudden storm that nearly blew the crown away. You ask whether that was considered a bad omen. The monk shrugs. The emperor ruled 30 years, so maybe not. Before evening falls, you return to the edge of the cliff for the horizon greeting ritual. The emperor stands alone, silhouetted against the blazing orange sky. His hands rise slowly, not in power, but in prayer. A small bird flits across the setting sun. Everything is quiet. For a moment, you forget you're exhausted, windblown, and still wearing a sandal held together by a goat's bad decisions. This high up, even time seems to pause. By now, you're beginning to understand that no one ends up on a mountaintop like Debre Damo by accident. Not the barefoot emperor, not the endlessly chanting monks, and certainly not you, nursing a sore everything and trying to look like you've always belonged here. This place wasn't built for comfort, it was built for meaning. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the people who live here full time. Not emperors, not soldiers, but monks, hermits, and the occasional alarmingly spry elderly nun who seems to teleport across the mountaintop without making a sound. They live in tiny stone huts, barely tall enough to stand in, with thatched roofs and small vegetable gardens growing in pockets of soil between rocks. A few keep bees, others raise doves. One particularly serene monk is rumored to be 112 years old and survives entirely on tea and verses from the Psalms. No one's sure if that's true, but everyone agrees not to question it. He's still faster than half the guards. You wander into one of the huts, invited by a young monk named Tesfaye. His cell is cool and quiet, the stone walls painted with faded crosses. There's a mat, a worn wooden prayer stool, and exactly 3 books, 2 in Ge'ez, 1 in Amharic. He offers you a bowl of warm barley and honey, the local version of comfort food. You take a bite. It tastes like cereal made by a poet. Tesfaye explains that he's been here for 9 years. He came after a dream, or maybe a fever. Sometimes it's the same thing, he says, smiling. He spends his days copying manuscripts by hand, tending to bees, and ringing the bell for morning prayer at an hour no sane person acknowledges. You ask if it ever gets lonely. He shrugs. Even alone, the mountain is busy. Indeed it is. Every sound here seems amplified. A goat's bleat echoes like a trumpet. The rustle of robes carries like wind through reeds. The steady thrum of prayer, a deep, pulsing murmur, is constant. Even the silence has texture. At times, it feels like you're sitting inside the earth's lungs. Of course, not all mountaintop residents are saints in training. Some are sentries, guards of royal lineage who've taken vows of service, if not quite silence. They carry spears and short swords, though most prefer long, curved staves carved with family symbols. You see one sharpening his blade with a chunk of obsidian, humming what sounds like an old lullaby. These guards are more than security. They're keepers of ritual, storytellers, and chroniclers of imperial gossip. They know which emperor cried during his coronation, which one fainted from altitude sickness, and which one kept a pet baboon that stole ceremonial bread during morning mass. Historians still argue whether these isolated strongholds were meant more for protection or spiritual purification. Some say the emperors were retreating from political threats. Others argue that isolation was intentional, less about safety, more about symbolism. After all, if you can commune with God in a place where goats struggle to climb, people tend to believe you've got some serious divine favor. But not everyone chose this mountaintop life. Some were born into it, sons of monks, daughters of workers, children who knew no world beyond the rock walls and thin air. They grow up learning to read by candlelight, to walk barefoot on stone, and to greet visitors, like you, with that timeless mix of curiosity and amusement. You pass a trio of kids playing with carved wooden animals. One holds up a lion with a chipped ear and tells you it's the emperor's favorite. Another insists her goat figurine can outrun any horse. You don't doubt her. That goat looks aerodynamic. Later, you visit the communal kitchen. It's a stone building with a soot-blackened roof and a pot large enough to bathe in. A priest is stirring a bubbling cauldron with a stick that looks suspiciously like a tree branch. The smell is incredible. Onions, garlic, wild herbs, and lentils all blending into a stew that's been cooking since before you arrived. Someone tosses in a handful of Berber spice, and the air practically sizzles. You're handed a piece of injera, the spongy, sour flatbread that doubles as both utensil and meal. You tear a piece, scoop some stew, and try not to make a mess of yourself. Spoiler, you fail. But no one minds. Eating here is as much about community as it is about taste. Meals are slow, shared, and quietly joyous. Afterward, you sit on a sun-warmed rock, full and a little sleepy. The wind brushes your cheek. A nearby monk hums a tune you don't recognize but instantly love. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you forget there's a whole world beyond this mountain. When you open them, the light has shifted. The sun is lower, the shadows longer. Someone is lighting candles in the chapel. Another monk is arranging flowers, wild lilies, yellow daisies, a sprig of something spiky that might just be decorative nettle. Night comes early up here. The horizon turns dusky pink. Smoke curls from chimneys. A bell rings, long and low, signaling evening prayer. The mountain breathes in, and so do you. You rise and walk slowly back toward the emperor's hut. He's seated outside now, surrounded by a small group, advisors, priests, a poet with a harp. They speak in low tones, not of politics or power, but of the stars, the seasons, and the names of the constellations. Above you, the sky begins to sparkle. You've made it to the heart of the mountain's solitude, and somehow, it doesn't feel lonely at all. You wake just before dawn, bundled in a woolen blanket that smells faintly of incense and sheep. The stone floor beneath you is cold, but the kind of cold that makes you grateful for every warm breath. Somewhere outside, a rooster lets out a noise that suggests it is deeply displeased with life at high altitude. You step outside into the crisp morning air. The stars are still visible, scattered like powdered sugar across the sky, though the eastern edge is beginning to pale with the promise of sunrise. Someone's already lit the kitchen fire. You can smell smoke and something that might be roasting barley. Breakfast or incense. Could go either way. As you wander toward the gathering space near the chapel, your sandals crunch over gravel. A monk greets you with a nod and a mug of something hot. Spiced tea, probably. It warms your hands and your spirits. You sip, and it tastes of cinnamon, clove, and mystery. Today is ceremonial. Not in the abstract, let's honor tradition sense, but in the very real, here comes the emperor in full regalia sense. You notice activity everywhere. People brushing dust off sacred books. A young monk carefully combing a lion's mane cloak. Two older attendants whispering over a crown that looks like it's made of gold and sunbeams. The outfit comes together slowly. First the linen underlayers, cool, stiff, and white as morning light. Then the embroidered tunic, adorned with crosses, lions, and the tree of life, stitched in shimmering thread. A sash follows, dyed deep crimson, knotted precisely. And then, the cloak. A heavy, awe-inspiring garment lined with fur and clasped with an ornate gold brooch shaped like a roaring lion's head. You're allowed to observe the dressing process. You stand quietly as the emperor extends one arm at a time, careful not to disturb the rhythm of those helping him. His face is serene, but you can sense the weight of what he's about to perform. Not just physically, although frankly, that cloak looks like it could cause neck strain, but spiritually. Every piece has meaning. Every thread carries a story. The crown itself is not what you'd expect. It's elegant, yes, but not exaggerated. A golden circlet with interwoven bands, set with small gems, red for courage, green for growth, blue for divine favor. Inlaid at the front is a stylized rendering of the Ark of the Covenant, believed by many to be safeguarded somewhere in Ethiopia. Historians still argue whether Ethiopian emperors truly believed they were descendants of Solomon and Sheba, or whether it was an inspired political myth that just stuck. Either way, the symbolism runs deep. Every color, every cloth, every ritual connects the emperor not just to his people, but to God, to legend, and to the land itself. There's also a pair of shoes involved. Technically, goatskin sandals with ceremonial braiding, but let's be honest, they're sandals, and not comfortable ones. You imagine ancient emperors hobbling across mountain rocks in these things, trying to look dignified while absolutely not tripping over their own feet. Once dressed, the emperor is led outside by two priests. The crowd that has gathered bows their heads. The wind picks up at exactly the right moment, catching the edges of his cloak like the mountain's own applause. He stands tall, eyes scanning the horizon as the first golden rays of sunlight crest over the ridge. A prayer is spoken, not loudly, not in booming theatrical tones, but softly, intimately, as though addressed to the mountain itself. The emperor kneels. Incense is lit. The smoke coils upward in lazy spirals, disappearing into the morning sky. You're drawn in by the quiet dignity of it all. There's no cheering, no fanfare, just a shared silence, a collective breath, as if everyone has momentarily remembered what it means to be very, very small beneath a very, very big sky. After the prayer, the emperor is anointed. A priest dips his fingers into perfumed oil, myrrh and olive, from what you can tell, and marks the emperor's forehead, chest, and shoulders. The oil glistens briefly, then fades into the fabric of his robe. Then comes the procession, not a grand parade, but a deliberate, graceful circuit around the mountain's chapel and outer paths. As he walks, attendants scatter herbs beneath his feet, rosemary, hyssop, and something pungent you can't identify. The scent is sharp, herbal, oddly grounding, a reminder that even here, in the clouds, the earth still matters. You walk a little behind, careful to stay respectful. The view to your right is staggering, sheer cliffs that drop into green valleys, woven with farms and forest trails. Mist still clings to the edges, and you think you spot a group of villagers far below, watching like tiny ants beneath the rim of the world. By the time the circuit is completed, the sun is fully up. Light floods the plateau. Everything looks golden, from the rooftops to the goats to the emperor's fur-lined collar. Someone sings a low, beautiful melody, and for a moment, time stops again. The ceremony ends with 3 bowed heads, the emperor, the priest, and the elder monk who rang the morning bell. The rest of the assembly slowly disperses. Some return to their huts, others linger, talking quietly or beginning the day's tasks. A few children dart between buildings, chasing shadows. You stand there a moment longer, watching the emperor speak softly to one of the guards. His robe billows slightly in the breeze. He smiles, nods, then turns and walks toward the chapel again. You can't help but think, this wasn't a performance. It wasn't a spectacle. It was something older, quieter, and infinitely more human. A man assuming the weight of history one step at a time, atop a rock older than memory, dressed in meaning, surrounded by sky. By now your senses are fully tuned to the rhythms of mountaintop life. The scent of frankincense lingers in your hair. Your footsteps instinctively soften when walking past the chapel, and you no longer flinch every time a goat bleats unexpectedly from behind a rock. Progress. But today brings something different. A feast. A ceremonial banquet, to be exact. And no, it's not the kind of royal spread where everyone gets a fork, a seat, and sparkling water. This is Ethiopia in the medieval highlands. You're eating with your hands, on the floor, probably next to someone who has memorized 500 years of church hymns and hasn't blinked in 6 hours. It begins with preparation. You follow your nose to the outdoor kitchen area, where a group of women and monks are hard at work. A huge flat stone has been heated over a fire, and batter is being poured in precise, practiced circles. Injera, the famed sourdough flatbread that is to Ethiopian cuisine what air is to breathing. Each piece bubbles gently as it cooks, forming thousands of tiny holes across its surface. These aren't flaws, they're edible pockets, perfect for soaking up sauces and, coincidentally, a great visual metaphor for a civilization built on detail. Nearby, a pot is simmering with lentils, onions, and berber, a crimson spice blend so fragrant it could knock out a small army. Another pot holds doro wat, a chicken stew as thick as lava and just as red. A monk stirs it with a carved spoon the size of a canoe paddle. The emperor himself will eat after the others, part tradition, part humility, but the meal itself is communal. No silver trays or gold cutlery here, just large shared platters, fingers, and etiquette that everyone knows instinctively. Only the right hand for eating, no licking your fingers between bites, and always offer the best pieces to someone older. As you sit, legs folded awkwardly, a monk places a section of injera in front of you. He follows it with ladles of lentils, a scoop of spicy cabbage, and a chunk of something suspiciously chicken-shaped. You tear off a corner of bread, scoop some stew, and immediately burn your mouth because, of course, it's boiling lava hot. Your neighbors pretend not to notice. You pretend you still have taste buds. The meal is not quiet, but it's not chaotic either. There's a gentle murmur of conversation, the occasional laughter when someone drops a chickpea, and a low rhythm of hands tearing, scooping, and sharing. One monk, blind in one eye, tells a story between bites about a goat that once tried to eat the emperor's robe. No one questions it. It sounds entirely plausible. You learn that food here is not just nourishment, it's memory. Every dish connects the eaters to centuries of culture, prayer, and land. The teff grain used for the injera? It's been cultivated in the Ethiopian highlands for over 5,000 years. The spices? Some came via ancient trade routes that once touched the Red Sea. Every bite is, quite literally, history. Midway through the meal, incense is lit, not as air freshener, but as tradition. The sweet smoke drifts between the diners like a blessing, softening the sounds, adding a haze to the already dreamy sunlight filtering through the trees. For a moment, you swear time folds in on itself. You're no longer in the present, but in some layered collage of centuries, where everyone who ever ate here is sitting at the same invisible table. At the far end of the gathering, the emperor rises. Everyone falls silent. He steps forward, picks up a piece of injera, and gently places it on the plate of a nearby elder, a bishop with a beard so majestic it might need its own title. The gesture is symbolic, generosity before authority, humility before power. It signals the end of the formal meal. Afterward, coffee is served, but this is not your cafe iced latte with 3 pumps of vanilla. This is buna, traditional Ethiopian coffee, roasted in small clay pans over open flame, ground by hand and brewed in a round-bellied pot called a jebana. The smell alone is enough to rouse the sleepy and calm the anxious. You cradle the tiny ceramic cup between your palms, sip, and instantly feel both wired and strangely at peace. As you drink, a woman begins a soft ululation, a high, wavering trill used to mark celebration. Others join in, their voices rising and falling like wind over rocks. The children clap. Someone begins tapping a drum. A young priest pulls out a one-stringed instrument and plucks a rhythm that somehow matches the breeze. And then, you spot the poet? He's an older man, lean as a prayer candle with a walking stick carved in the shape of a lion. His robe is simple, his eyes sharp. He sits down among a small crowd and begins to recite something in Ge'ez. You don't understand the words, but the cadence pulls you in. Even the goats pause to listen. Probably. You ask someone beside you what he's saying. The translation is rough, but the gist is this. The mountain speaks not in thunder, but in footsteps. The emperor rises not to rule, but to remember. We eat not to fill, but to feel. You finish your coffee. Someone plays a final, soft note. The meal is over. The air is warm. The sun is now high. You're full in every sense of the word. Stomach, mind, heart. A feast of food, yes, but also of silence, of sound, of stories. Your belly is full, your feet are sore, and your senses are soaked in incense, spice, and the sounds of distant hymns. But you're not done. Not yet. Because tucked into the side of this mountaintop is something utterly magical. A hidden chapel, older than most nations, carved directly into the living stone. You wouldn't notice it if someone didn't point it out. The entrance is small, almost shy, like the mountain is keeping it a secret. No grand facade, no glittering stained glass, just a low arch framed by hand-chiseled patterns of crosses and curling vines, worn down by wind, weather, and prayer. You duck your head and step inside. Instantly, the light dims. The outside world disappears. Inside, the air is thick with stillness, and beeswax, and something else. Something that feels like the accumulated breath of 1,000 years of devotion. The room is small, maybe the size of a modest living room. The walls are smooth but uneven, the ceiling low. Candles flicker in niches carved into the rock. Their flames cast golden reflections on the stone, dancing across murals of saints, angels, and Ethiopian crosses. Some are so old the paint has faded to ghostly outlines. Others, newer additions, burst with color, like someone tried to repaint history in between morning prayers. The floor is cool beneath your feet. You step carefully, almost tiptoeing. Every sound, your breath, your heartbeat, the soft scrape of your sandal, feels exaggerated. You wonder if even your thoughts are echoing. A priest sits cross-legged in a corner, humming softly, thumbing through a heavy leather-bound book. The script is Ge'ez, flowing and ancient, written in ink made from soot and crushed berries. He doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. He knows you're here. Everyone does. The mountain tells. At the front of the chapel is the tableau, a sacred replica of the Ark of the Covenant, covered in cloth, never to be seen except during the most sacred holidays. It is the soul of the church. In Ethiopia, no church is complete without one. Even a mountaintop chapel hidden in stone isn't exempt. You sit on a cushion offered by a novice monk and take in the scene. The candlelight plays tricks with the shadows. A mural of St. George slaying the dragon catches your eye. Except in this version, the dragon looks suspiciously like a giant lizard with very judgmental eyes. Another image shows Solomon meeting the Queen of Sheba beneath a stylized tree, its branches curling into infinity. Historians still argue whether these images reflect local myth blended with scripture, or a deliberate reworking of Christian iconography to reflect Ethiopian royal lineage. Either way, they're beautiful and strange and completely mesmerizing. As your eyes adjust further, you notice a small window, really more of a slit, in the wall behind the altar. Sunlight slices through it like a divine spotlight, illuminating a single book resting on a wooden stand. You walk over. It's a psalter, hand-bound, pages thick as bark, ink still vibrant after centuries. You don't touch it. You just stare, half expecting it to hum. Nearby, another monk tends to a collection of ceremonial objects, a silver hand cross, a bell shaped like a blooming flower, and a bundle of herbs used during special prayers. He moves like he's underwater, slow, deliberate, reverent. You feel like you're in a place where time doesn't pass. It pools. He notices your attention and smiles gently. This church, he says, has never left the mountain. You nod, though you're not sure what he means. Maybe it's literal, maybe it's metaphorical, maybe it's both. The priest begins to chant. The sound starts low and builds gradually, like mist rising. His voice is deep and steady, each note stretching into the stone like it belongs there. Others join in, first one, then two, then a handful of monks singing in perfect breathy harmony. There's no music, no instruments, just voices, human and holy and hauntingly soft. And then, it happens. You begin to feel the stone itself vibrate, just slightly, as if the mountain isn't just a backdrop, but a participant. The sound resonates through your spine, not loud but deep, a kind of geological lullaby. You close your eyes. For a moment, you're not in a chapel. You're inside a heartbeat, a warm, slow, stone-sheltered heartbeat echoing across the centuries. When the chanting stops, it does so without ceremony. Just silence. No applause, no signal, just a natural return to stillness, as if sound is a guest that's been quietly escorted out. You open your eyes. The candlelight seems dimmer now, or maybe the sun has shifted. Either way, the room feels cooler, more settled. A novice monk offers you a small vial of scented oil, frankincense mixed with myrrh and something woody, possibly cedar. He nods toward the entrance. Time to leave. You bow, awkwardly but sincerely, and step back out into the sunlight. It's almost blinding after the amber glow inside. The mountain greets you again with wind and wide skies. A hawk cries in the distance. The goat you met yesterday is now chewing something it probably shouldn't. You're not sure how long you were in there, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 100 years. Either way, you feel different, lighter, quieter, as if part of you stayed behind, folded into the candlelit corners of that little chapel in the stone. And maybe that's the point. You're starting to feel like a regular up here. You know where the tea is kept, how to nod respectfully at the monks, and which goat is least likely to nibble your robe. But today, something feels off. There's a tension in the air, not hostile, just heavy. You notice the guards are more alert. The monks whisper more than chant. The emperor's attendants keep glancing toward the cliffside rope like they're expecting someone, or not expecting someone, and that's the problem. Eventually, you ask a scribe what's going on. He shrugs and says, "This mountain isn't always for coronations." Then he walks off with a scroll tucked under his arm, like the conversation was never meant to happen. And just like that, you tumble into one of the lesser-known truths of Ethiopian royal tradition. Sometimes the mountaintop is a palace, and sometimes it's a prison. You see, Ethiopian emperors weren't just crowned on mountaintops, they were also contained there. Amba Geshen, another steep-sided natural fortress like Debre Damo, was famous not just for its churches and ceremonies, but as a royal holding cell. It was where rival princes, potential heirs, and inconvenient cousins were safely stored. For decades, sometimes for life, historians still argue whether the system was enlightened risk management or polite royal house arrest with very scenic views. But either way, the logic was clear. If you're going to sequester someone to keep them from stealing the throne, why not pick a mountaintop that's nearly impossible to escape without a rope, a mule, and a particularly forgiving eagle? You learn that many emperors, especially during the medieval Solomonic dynasty, were raised in these places. Entire generations grew up surrounded by cliffs and clouds, told from childhood that one day they might be king, but only if someone down below decided it was their time. Imagine that, waking up every morning with the sunrise blasting through your tiny window, your only company being monks, guards, and the occasional suspicious cat, eating your barley porridge while wondering whether today you'd get a crown, or just another year of high-altitude exile. And it wasn't always peaceful. In one particularly grim story, a noble rebel attempted to smuggle weapons into Amba Geshen, hidden inside food deliveries, wooden bowls stuffed with bread and knives. The plan failed, as you might expect, when someone noticed the unusually crunchy injera. The prince stayed where he was. The rebel, not so much. You visit a small stone cell tucked behind the main prayer hall. It's windowless, with a single candle and a mat. This was once a royal waiting room, you're told, a polite term for holding chamber. The walls are scratched with markings, some of them prayer verses, others just tick marks. Hundreds of them. You stop counting at 47. One inscription catches your eye. It's in Ge'ez, but a monk translates softly. He who sleeps beneath heaven waits for God's timing, not man's. Poetic, and a little heartbreaking. Back outside, you notice a group of monks walking silently along the edge of the plateau. One carries a small casket of scrolls. Another holds a wooden tablet inscribed with the names of every royal who's lived or died on this mountain. It's a long list. You find out that not all mountaintop emperors were reluctant residents. Some chose isolation. One emperor, Dawit II, reportedly spent months on a mountaintop in solitary retreat before returning to rule with unexpected grace. Another, suspecting betrayal in the capital, voluntarily exiled himself to pray for clarity, which, frankly, is an elite-level avoidance strategy. Sorry, can't attend your coup. I'm busy talking to God at 2,900 meters. But of course, isolation can cut both ways. In a quiet corner of the plateau, there's a small garden. Wild thyme, rosemary, a few struggling flowers. It's tended by a woman who's lived on the mountain since she was a child. Her grandfather was once a cook for a shadow prince, a royal never crowned but always watched. She tells you the prince never left the mountain, never tried to. Maybe he believed he didn't need a throne, she says, kneeling to pluck weeds. Maybe he liked the silence more. You wonder how many emperors were forgotten simply because they stayed up here too long. out of sight, out of power, left to fade like old murals in the chapel. Later, as you sip tea by the fire, one of the guards speaks up. "The mountain is loyal to no man," he says, unprompted. "It gives peace, and it gives solitude, but it takes your name if you stay too long." You nod slowly. There's truth in that. Up here, surrounded by clouds and crickets and endless wind, it's easy to feel timeless, or invisible, or both. Before bed, you return to the chapel one more time. The candles are low. The chant, softer now, almost whispers. You kneel and offer a silent prayer, not for power, not for clarity, but for something simpler. Memory. Because in a place like this, it's easy to vanish. And yet, every stone here remembers. Every echo knows your name. You rise early the next morning, if rise is the right word, for dragging yourself off a stone sleeping mat with the flexibility of a centuries-old scroll. The air is crisp, thin, and, as always, smells faintly of firewood and holy oil. You stretch your arms and step outside into the stillness, greeted by an imperial guard who nods silently and gestures toward the mountain's edge. It's time to see what the emperor saw. You follow a narrow path that winds between low stone buildings and scrubby patches of wild herbs. The dew clings to your sandals. A goat gives you a suspicious look and then returns to chewing on something that probably belonged to someone important. The higher you climb, yes, even on a mountain, there's always more climbing, the wider the sky becomes. Then, suddenly, you're there. At the farthest point of the mountaintop plateau lies a small outcrop, just large enough for a single bench carved into the rock. It faces nothing and everything. Before you lies a panorama so breathtaking it almost feels unreal. Rolling green valleys, terraced fields etched into hillsides, rivers snaking through gorges, and somewhere beyond the haze, the ghost of another mountain cloaked in cloud. This is the view worth a kingdom. You sit, letting your breath catch up to your eyes. It's quiet here, too quiet. Even the birds seem reluctant to interrupt the emperor's favorite thinking spot. You imagine him sitting exactly where you are, perhaps with a prayer book in hand, perhaps simply watching the horizon, wondering how many of the tiny dots below would one day shout his name, or forget it. The air is thin and clean, sharp in your lungs but not unpleasant. A wind brushes your face, smelling of eucalyptus, rock, and smoke from some invisible village fire far, far below. You feel impossibly small, and oddly calm. A priest joins you, older than most trees, his beard braided with tiny beads. He settles beside you without a word, and offers a small clay cup filled with tej, a honey wine, sweet and slightly fizzy. You sip. It tastes like fermented sunshine and possibly ancient bee debates. The priest speaks softly. Here, you see what the emperor sees, but not what he carries. You nod, unsure if that's a proverb, a warning, or both. It's easy to romanticize the view, to think that ruling from this perch must have felt glorious, elevated, chosen. But then you remember the stories, the prince who grew up on the mountain and never left, the king who came here to escape rebellion, the crown placed on trembling heads by priests who knew the danger of elevation was not just physical. Historians still argue whether these views were chosen for their symbolism or their strategic value. Some say the highlands offered better visibility against approaching threats. Others insist it was all about psychological power. If the people see you atop the world, they believe you belong there. High places, high status. You gaze down and try to spot movement. Far below, specks on the horizon shift. People herding goats, women washing clothes near a river, children running between clusters of tucals. Life continues, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that someone is watching from above. Then you realize something quietly profound. From this height, everything blurs into a living map. Villages look like pebbles, roads like threads, people like ants. And yet, from down there, you are the myth, the figure cloaked in fog and legend, sitting where the hawks dare. Suddenly, a shadow passes overhead. You flinch slightly, just a bird, a large one, circling on the thermals, a vulture maybe, or an eagle. On this mountain, it's always hard to tell the difference. You think back to an old tale you heard last night around the fire, that an emperor once saw a bird circle 3 times before his coronation and took it as a sign. He ruled only 6 months. The bird, apparently, had been circling because someone dropped a chicken bone near the cliff. So much for omens. But that's the thing, isn't it? Up here, everything feels like a sign. The wind, the bird, the silence. You could convince yourself the mountain is speaking, because in a way, it is, just not in words. You shift slightly, realizing the stone bench is less throne-like than expected. It's chipped in places, the edges worn smooth by time and countless royal rumps. Lichen clings to its underside. A small flower grows from a crack nearby. Even sacred places get a bit shabby. Comforting, somehow. A younger monk arrives and bows. He's carrying a leather-bound notebook and a short wooden stylus. He begins to sketch the view, murmuring the names of the places he sees. River Tekeze, fields of Axum, that ridge where the rebels once fled. He points out things you would have missed, monastery ruins, ancient trails, stone towers now claimed by moss and myth. You ask him if he draws often. He smiles. Only what we cannot remember. Somewhere behind you, a drum sounds, one slow beat, echoing through the rock. A signal. The emperor is returning from prayer. The monk closes his book. The old priest finishes his wine. You all sit for one more moment together, facing the endless sky. And then, as gently as they arrived, they leave. You're alone again. You stand, one last look, one last breath. You feel like you've glimpsed something sacred, and not in a museum glass kind of way, but in the quiet, awkward, goat-haunted way that only this place could offer. You begin the slow walk back, the stone under your feet warmed by the sun. Behind you, the mountain stays the same, watching, waiting, and far below life goes on. You don't expect a haircut on a mountaintop, yet here you are, sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, watching a man with a golden comb prepare to trim the emperor's hair like it's a ritual, which, to be fair, it is. In the world below, haircuts are ordinary, functional, maybe even regrettable if you went in asking for just a trim and came out looking like an anxious sheep. But here, where the clouds drift at eye level and the sun feels closer than the ground, every lock snipped has meaning. Every strand carries weight, symbolic of course, though judging by the emperor's cape of curls, also literal. You learn that imperial grooming is not vanity, it's a message, a performance, a prayer disguised as personal hygiene. The emperor sits before a small hand mirror, its surface polished bronze, its back carved with lions and laurels. A priest stands beside him, reading from a weathered scroll in Ge'ez, while the appointed royal groom combs through his hair with fingers soaked in oil of myrrh and frankincense. The hair is not cut often. When it is, it marks a moment, coronation, mourning, or divine supplication. Each snip of the knife, a curved blade more ceremonial than sharp, is accompanied by whispered blessings. The clippings are gathered into a silk cloth and later burned in a secret fire, their ashes scattered to the wind or buried beside the chapel. You're not sure which. The rules depend on the moment. And the monk. You glance at the emperor. He looks still, not stiff, but held, as if he knows that this, too, is part of being king, that the hand on his shoulder, the comb in his curls, the fire waiting to consume his discarded strands, all of it is a crown in pieces. Next, the beard. Now, if the head was sacred, the beard is downright holy. According to tradition, a full beard signifies wisdom, patience, and divine favor. The emperor's beard is more poetry than facial hair. Thick, curling slightly at the ends, streaked with a line of silver so perfectly placed it looks like it was painted on by angels with design degrees. The beard is not shaved. Oh no, that would be scandalous. It's fluffed, dusted, sometimes lightly scented with a mixture of crushed sandalwood and rose petals. A priest murmurs a psalm as the emperor's jawline is gently combed. The sound of the bristles dragging through the beard is oddly soothing, like a soft brushstroke across silk. Historians still argue whether these grooming rituals were modeled after earlier priest-king traditions from the Aksumite era, or if they developed later as part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's evolving ceremonial code. Either way, this isn't just a beauty routine. This is theology, optics, and cultural branding all wrapped up in curls and combs. You're invited to witness another ritual, this one even stranger, the anointing of the emperor's feet. Now, medieval feet are not known for their aesthetic charm, but here they are washed in warm water, scented with eucalyptus and thyme, then dried with hand-woven cloths before being dabbed with oil. The symbolism is humility, service. The emperor is mighty, yes, but also grounded, dusty, human. The monk performing this ritual barely blinks. He might have done this for 10 emperors before, maybe more. His hands are practiced, reverent, slow, like the feet before him are not feet at all, but relics. After the rituals, the emperor changes garments. His robe is swapped for a lighter tunic embroidered with images of saints and scriptural verses. He walks barefoot for a while, part of the ceremonial transition, leaving behind one identity, stepping into another. The path he follows is strewn with petals, yellow, white, and the occasional cheeky goat dropping that someone will very soon notice. You follow at a respectful distance alongside the emperor's attendants. One of them, a young man with a laugh like falling coins, explains that this part of the day is about reflection. Not speeches, not decisions, just presence. The emperor, he says, must remember how to be small before he can carry the weight of being large. You nod slowly, absorbing it. It makes a strange kind of sense. Up here, the line between humility and grandeur is as thin as the air. The emperor stops at a large rock, shaded by a gnarled fig tree. He sits, not regally, just comfortably. A child appears from nowhere, giggling, and hands him a flower. He accepts it, smiles, and tucks it behind his ear. No one tells him that's undignified. On the mountain, dignity wears many faces. You're offered a seat nearby. Someone hands you a handful of roasted barley and dried apricots wrapped in cloth. You snack in silence, watching the emperor, who now seems less like a figurehead and more like someone you might actually talk to about the weather, or goats, or that unfortunate time you slipped on consecrated stairs. As the sun begins to dip, a small bell rings, not loud, just enough to say, "It's time to return." The emperor rises, dusts off his robe, and begins the walk back toward the chapel. And you realize something unexpected. For all the rituals, symbols, and layers of history wrapped around him, like so much embroidered linen, he's still just a man. A man with hair that now smells faintly of holy oil and fig tree. A man with a beard so magnificent it could be its own form of governance. A man who rules from the clouds but walks barefoot on stone. By now you've spent enough time on this mountaintop to know that nothing up here happens without a ritual. Eating, walking, haircuts, even blinking probably. But there's one group of people whose routines are less showy, more silent, and absolutely vital to the entire spectacle. The Imperial Guards. They don't chant, they don't anoint, they don't quote scripture in perfect Ge'ez. They stand, they watch, and they do it all with the quiet suspicion of people who've seen too many royal relatives sneak poison into the soup. You spot one of them standing near the edge of a terrace, spear in hand, eyes fixed on nothing in particular and everything at once. His uniform is simple, an indigo cotton tunic belted with braided leather, overlaid with a cloak that looks like it could either keep you warm or smother a rebellion. You walk up slowly, he doesn't move, doesn't even glance your way, just says, "Careful, wind changes fast here." You take a step back from the cliff. The guards are a breed unto themselves. Not monks, not nobles, but not exactly ordinary soldiers either. Many come from hereditary lines of warriors, tied to the royal house for generations. Their training starts young, running up mountain paths, memorizing the emperor's personal lineage, and learning which ceremonial sword to grab when the drums sound twice, not once. You watch as a group of them rotate shifts. One passes his spear to another like a relay baton. No words, just a look, a nod, and a silent inventory of everything in the valley below. They scan the hills for signs of movement, listen to the wind for echoes of drums, and sniff the air like seasoned chefs checking for rebellion. And yes, there are drums, not music but messages. Across the valleys and peaks, stationed at different altitudes, are outposts known as Nagas Tor, the king's ears, each one manned by a lookout and equipped with large wooden drums carved from hollowed tree trunks. A single beat signals peace. 2 means the emperor has arrived. 3, let's just say someone probably tried to crown themselves a little too early. You hear a deep boom in the distance. One drum beat. Pause. Two more. The guard next to you tilts his head, then relaxes. The bishop's arrived, he says, only 3 hours late. You learn that before radios and cell phones, or even reliable road systems, these mountain guards formed a communication web faster than most runners. A message could travel from Lalibela to Gondar in a single afternoon, so long as every drum was manned and every guard knew the code. Some messages were dramatic, others not so much. One scroll in the royal archive recorded a drum message that translated roughly to, "The emperor's goat has wandered off again. Please send help." We can only hope they didn't send the cavalry. Of course, these guards weren't just lookouts. They were protectors of secrets. Every emperor has them. Every court is riddled with whispers, politics, and cousins with questionable ambitions. The guards hear everything. They see more. And yet, they speak less than any monk. That's why they're trusted, or at least, tolerated. Historians still debate the extent of their power. Some suggest the guards were merely ceremonial in later periods, stand-ins for actual bodyguards who worked behind the scenes. Others insist they were kingmakers, silent arbiters of legitimacy, capable of removing one ruler and installing another with nothing more than a closed-door nod. Whatever the case, you get the feeling that if something were to go terribly wrong up here, they'd know before the monks, the emperor, and probably the goat. You meet one elder guard sitting under a fig tree, polishing a curved blade with a cloth that's seen better centuries. He tells you he once escorted an emperor to the summit in total silence. 5 days of walking, climbing, and not a single word exchanged. "How'd you know where you wanted to go?" you ask. The man shrugs. "We just followed the one who looked most worried." You both laugh, briefly, then he returns to polishing. At dusk, the guards gather near the chapel, not to pray, but to eat. Bread, roasted lentils, and a single jug of tea each passed around like communion. They don't speak much, but they watch, always watch. Even during ceremonies, they stay alert. When the emperor bows, they glance at the crowd. When incense is lit, they check the horizon. When the choir sings, they listen for something off-key, not musically, but politically. And yet, they're not joyless. One younger guard smuggles roasted chickpeas into your hand with a wink. Another whistles a tune that you're pretty sure is a hymn reworked into a tavern song. Even up here, on the most sacred of peaks, they find space for humor. Quiet humor, admittedly. The kind you can only share with people who know how to fight while holding a candle. As night falls, you watch them retreat to their posts. One by one, they disappear into shadows. No lanterns, no noise, just the occasional glint of a spear tip catching moonlight. The emperor sleeps knowing they're watching. The mountain sleeps knowing they always have. You wake to the distant thrum of a drumbeat. Low, steady, and just rhythmic enough to suggest something important is happening somewhere that isn't here. Yet, on the mountaintop, sound travels like a guest who never knocks. It arrives unannounced and always means something. You shuffle outside, squinting against the morning light. The guards are already alert, scanning the ridges. A monk with an eyebrow permanently arched in suspicion hurries past with a scroll tucked under one arm and a look that says, "Don't ask." So of course you do. "What's the news?" He pauses, sighs like someone who's been asked that question every day for 40 years, and replies, "Someone got married. Someone else might be invading." The usual. And just like that, you're introduced to one of the strangest and most ingenious systems of communication in the medieval world. Royal mountain gossip via drumbeat. Forget emails, forget smoke signals. In Ethiopia's highlands, messages traveled via coded drumbeats in verbal relay passed from monastery to monastery, fortress to fortress, all the way from Lalibela to Lake Tana. If there was a scandal, a sermon, or someone's cousin being a little too ambitious, the mountains knew. It starts with the Negarit, the royal war drum. Large, leather-skinned, and capable of producing a sound you don't just hear, you feel it in your ribs. One beat might mean ceremony beginning. 2, important guest. 3, dust off the spears, we've got a situation. Add a pause, repeat the sequence, and you've got a fully functional medieval inbox. You follow the sound toward a signal post. Really just a raised stone platform with a drum, a carved horn, and a young man with the look of someone who's accidentally become very important today. He nods as you approach. "Message from the Blue Ridge," he says. A lion was seen near the eastern gate, or a man in a lion costume. Either way, everyone's excited. You ask how he knows which messages are real. He smiles. We don't. That's what makes it interesting. From this platform, you can see 3 other outposts in the distance. One to the northeast, one across a valley, and one perched so precariously on a ledge that it feels more decorative than functional. At each, small figures move, raising horns, tapping drums, lighting small fires for the next relay. The messages aren't always political. Sometimes they're ceremonial, announcing fasts, festivals, or funerals. Sometimes they're warnings, landslides, bandits, or weather shifts. And sometimes they're, well, not exactly urgent. A monk named Ezra tells you that once, in the 16th century, a message was sent across 12 peaks to declare that someone had successfully baked the largest piece of injera in recorded memory. No one believed it, he says, but the emperor sent a thank you scroll anyway. You learn that certain messengers are chosen not for speed but for memory. These are the wogasha, verbal carriers who memorize entire reports, then jog between outposts to deliver them word for word. No parchment, no room for error. One wogasha you meet claims he once memorized a genealogy stretching back 15 generations. Another proudly states he carried a romantic poem across 3 provinces without missing a syllable, or blushing. Historians still debate the accuracy of these transmissions. Some say the relay system was prone to distortion. Others claim it was remarkably reliable, with built-in redundancies, nosy monks who corrected anything that didn't sound holy enough. Either way, it worked. The emperor knew what was happening in his realm long before smoke could rise from a village or ink could dry on parchment. You're handed a small horn carved from antelope bone, the kind used for short-distance signals. The monk gestures for you to try. You blow into it and immediately regret it. It produces a noise somewhere between a goose honk and an alarmed donkey. A child nearby laughs so hard he falls over. You hand the horn back. Better to leave this to the professionals. Later that day, you visit the royal scriptorium, another stone room tucked beneath a sloped roof where scribes bend over scrolls, transcribing not just scripture, but news. Yes, news, the official version of events. One scribe explains, "We write what the mountain hears." You ask if they ever embellish. He doesn't answer, but you spot a doodle in the corner of the page, a goat wearing a crown. Fair enough. You pass a group of monks gathered under a fig tree, quietly arguing over a message they received earlier. One insists the emperor of a neighboring province is planning a visit. Another thinks it's a warning about locusts. A third says it was probably a wedding, or a funeral, or both. You sip your tea and wisely keep your thoughts to yourself. What becomes clear is this. On the mountaintop, information is sacred, but also fluid. There's truth, and there's transmission, and somewhere between them is the drumbeat, echoing across the valleys, keeping time with the hearts of those who live far above the ground. That night, as the stars emerge and the wind whistles through the chapel walls, you hear another series of beats. 3, pause, 2, 1. You turn to the guard beside you. What's that one mean? He listens, tilts his head, and smiles faintly. Someone's goat had twins, again. You both chuckle. Even on the roof of the world, life has a way of keeping it interesting. The next morning arrives on a whisper. No bells, no drums, just a shift in the air, cooler, heavier. Even the goats are quieter, which is either a blessing or a sign of impending mischief. You stretch your arms, expecting the usual routines, prayer, tea, a mildly suspicious look from the scribe who thinks you nap too much. But something feels different. It takes you a moment to realize it. The mountain feels secretive today, not silent exactly, but withdrawn, like it knows something it's not telling. You're not alone in feeling it. The guards are more subdued, their usual nods now mere glances. The monks shuffle with purpose, as if called to some quiet duty they won't speak of. Even the emperor, robed in his simpler garments, walks with his hands clasped tightly behind his back, eyes scanning the mist that drapes itself lazily across the plateau like a veil. You follow him, discreetly of course, as he steps away from the main paths and heads toward a rarely used trail, winding along the backside of the peak. It leads to an outcropping so narrow and hidden you would have missed it if not for the flicker of candlelight. This, a monk whispers as you pass, is where the mountain keeps its secrets. It's called Teyit Gidel, the place that forgets. An old name, possibly a metaphor, possibly not. The space is little more than a cave carved into the rock. Inside, the air is cool and dry, the walls etched with hundreds of faint names, many of them now unreadable. Some are in Ge'ez, others in Amharic. A few look like hurried scribbles from someone who didn't expect to be remembered at all. This, you're told, was a place of refuge and of exile. When the empire was turbulent, as empires tend to be, those out of favor with the court were sometimes sent here. Not imprisoned, exactly, but hidden, sheltered, forgotten. Princes who lost favor, advisors who knew too much, soldiers who saw the wrong thing at the wrong time. Even a poet once, apparently, who rhymed something a little too accurately for the emperor's taste. Historians still debate how many people came here willingly. Some saw it as punishment, others a mercy, to disappear for a while, to let history pass you by while you sit with the bees and the wind and your regrets. It's unclear how long most stayed. A year, a decade, a lifetime. Records, like the names on the walls, fade fast up here. The emperor walks slowly through the space, fingers trailing the rock, pausing now and then at a name he seems to recognize. He says nothing, just breathes, listens. You do the same. In the back corner of the cave is a small stone altar. No gold, no carvings, just 3 candles in a bowl filled with dried herbs. A priest kneels there, chanting something too soft to catch. He opens a scroll, fragile as leaves in winter, and reads a list of names, one by one, with pauses between, not to rush, not to forget. You realize this is a remembrance, a ritual for the unnamed, the unclaimed, the ones history did not bother to crown or to bury. You step outside into the fog, feeling the mountain's quiet pulse. It's not just a throne, it's a vault, a keeper of memory, and sometimes a protector of the inconvenient. You sit near the cave's entrance as a monk tells you the story of Abba Tekle, a priest who once hid a rebel prince here for nearly 20 years. The prince never left, but neither did the priest. Maybe, the monk says with a shrug. They both liked the silence. Nearby, a child places a single white flower on a stone. She says nothing. You don't ask. Later, you walk to the north ridge where a small garden grows, wild herbs, scrubby flowers, and a few stubborn fig trees. It's tended by one of the oldest residents of the mountain, a woman with a spine like a question mark and hands that know every wrinkle in the soil. She tells you that seeds from this garden were once smuggled down to the valleys as signs of peace. A fig from the mountain meant a promise, she says. A sprig of rosemary meant a death had been forgiven. You stare at the plants in a new light. They're not just greenery. They're a code, another kind of drumbeat. And so the mountain whispers on, through leaves, through wind, through fading names in forgotten caves. By evening, the fog lifts. The emperor returns to the main plateau, where a modest meal is served. No feast today, just lentils, injera, and a quiet glance shared between him and the guards. No words spoken, but the kind of look that says, we remember, we always do. The stars begin to poke through the dusk. A child nearby asks a monk why some names were never written down. Because some stories, the monk replies, are too sacred to tell, and some too dangerous. You sip your tea, now lukewarm, but somehow sweeter, and you realize this mountain isn't just a place of ceremony. It's where history comes to hide, and where forgetting is a form of keeping. You wake to the sound of splattering, not drums, not chanting, not even a dramatic goat entrance. Nope, just good old-fashioned rain. And not a polite drizzle either, the kind of downpour that feels like the sky has decided to empty its pockets all at once, right onto your head. Welcome to the monsoon season, mountaintop edition. You poke your head out of your sleeping quarters and immediately regret it. Sheets of mist are sweeping across the plateau, carried by winds that smell of wet stone and possibly goat shampoo, hard to say. Everything is wet anyway, even the air. Today was supposed to be a holy day. A ceremony, a gathering of monks and visitors for a ritual blessing of the rains, ironic in the way that only weather can be. The emperor had planned a sunrise prayer, followed by incense offerings and a procession to the northern ridge, where a sacred fig tree blooms once a year. None of that is happening. Instead, people are slipping on mud, chasing after runaway tents, and shouting things that are probably not in the Ge'ez liturgy. One priest slides past you, barefoot, with a bundle of scrolls tucked under his arm like a desperate librarian trying to rescue history from mildew. You find the emperor sheltering under a wide awning made from stretched goat hides. His robes are damp, his beard is dripping. He doesn't look amused. "This is normal," says a monk, patting your arm. "Last year, the wind blew the bishop into the cooking fire." You raise an eyebrow. He was fine, just a little singed, smelled like lentils for a week. The ceremony is postponed, but the spirit of the day isn't lost. Inside the chapel, monks gather to recite prayers, their voices rising over the sound of rain hammering the roof like 1,000 impatient pilgrims. A fire is lit. Wet sandals are removed and lined up like soggy trophies. Someone starts preparing coffee because, really, what else do you do when the heavens are throwing a tantrum? You learn that the rainy season ceremonies were never about perfection. They were about persistence. The monsoons in Ethiopia are both blessing and challenge, life-giving, crop-saving, and also occasionally festival-ruining. For the highland communities, rain was always sacred. It meant survival, renewal, but also inconvenience. Holy days were held anyway, even if the altar cloths got soaked and someone inevitably slipped into a puddle with dramatic flair. Historians still argue whether the mountaintop ceremonies were meant to be weatherproof. Some say that unpredictability was part of the test. A true emperor could kneel in the mud and still look majestic. Others suggest it was just poor planning. Either way, everyone up here seems to roll with it. You duck into the side chapel and find a cluster of novices frantically drying pages of an ancient hymnal over a cooking fire. The pages puff up and wrinkle slightly, but the ink holds. "Sacred but resilient," one says proudly. You nod, like the mountain itself. Outside, a priest in a very wet robe stands holding a cross aloft as rain trickles down his arm. He doesn't flinch, just holds it higher. Children splash through puddles with the kind of joy that comes from knowing no one can stop them today. One slips, falls flat on his back, and starts laughing so hard a monk has to sit down next to him and catch his own breath. Meanwhile, the emperor's attendants are improvising. Instead of a formal procession, they've set up a canopy in the courtyard where people come to receive blessings, one by one, in the dry-ish zone under the goat hide tarp. The emperor blesses each person not with solemn gravity, but with a soggy grin and a handful of basil. A few of the older monks begin singing. Nothing formal, just verses about storms, hope, and the occasional goat caught in the wind. By midday, everything is soaked, and no one seems to care. You sit beside the fire, sipping the third cup of buna someone's handed you, watching steam rise from a pile of drying robes. A novice tosses a handful of cloves into the flames, and the air fills with spicy sweetness. Someone begins telling stories about the year lightning struck the chapel bell, and it kept ringing by itself for hours. About the emperor who refused to carry an umbrella on holy days, because if the Lord wants me wet, I shall be drenched with dignity. That emperor caught pneumonia, by the way, but his dignity was reportedly stunning. A scribe reads a passage from a dusty scroll. Rain washes not only the earth, but also the noise of ambition. You look around. No royal pomp, no elaborate rituals, just dripping people, laughing monks, and a pile of incense-soaked firewood crackling like it knows something you don't. And somehow it feels even holier than the original plan. As the evening falls, the rain lets up. The clouds break apart like sheep dispersing. Golden light seeps through the mist. A rainbow, yes, a real one, because the mountain never misses a theatrical moment, arches across the valley. The emperor steps outside, removes his cloak, and stands in the rain's final mist. His beard glistens, his feet are bare, and then, with no ceremony, no signal, and no trumpet, he begins to sing. Softly, just a single line of melody, half hymn, half lullaby. Others join, one by one, until the whole mountain is humming. And just like that, the monsoon has passed, not with silence, but with song. The final morning on the mountain arrives not with fanfare, but with birdsong, soft, clear, and entirely disinterested in your emotions. The air is fresh, cleansed by yesterday's downpour. The stones feel warmer underfoot, and the mist that usually clings like a shawl around the mountain's shoulders has pulled back, revealing an expanse of sky so blue it looks freshly painted. You move slower today, not out of fatigue, though the climb, the rituals, the weather, and the deeply spiritual wrestling match with a particularly grumpy goat may have contributed, but because you know it's the last day. The final walk, the last cup of mountain tea sipped beside a chapel that still smells of candle wax and cinnamon. The emperor is already up. He's dressed simply, his ceremonial robe swapped for a white cotton shawl. He walks the plateau quietly, pausing to greet each monk, each scribe, each sleepy novice rubbing their eyes and muttering prayers under their breath. There's no throne today, no crown, just him, barefoot again, stepping slowly through the mountain he has ruled, remembered, and respected. You join the morning service not inside the chapel, but outside beneath a tree that has stood on this peak longer than any emperor. The monks chant, the birds answer. A goat sneezes nearby, which no one even questions anymore. Today's sermon is short, a passage from the book of Sirach about wisdom, how it grows quietly like a stream carving stone, how it dwells not in palaces but in patience. No one says it aloud, but everyone feels it. This mountaintop, in all its damp, foggy, goat-adjacent glory, is wisdom. After the service, preparations begin for the descent. It's not a rushed process. You can't just zipline out of a medieval spiritual site. Belongings are wrapped in cloth, scrolls secured in wax-sealed pouches, and ceremonial items placed in long, leather-bound chests to be lowered by rope. The sacred tableau, the replica ark, will remain, carried down only once every few years, and only with a procession of chanting priests and a crowd that stretches for miles. The emperor says his goodbyes, not formally, just a clasped shoulder here, a whispered word there. With one monk, he shares a long embrace. With a child, a wink and a scrap of embroidered cloth. He kisses the chapel's stone doorway. Then he turns to the edge of the mountain, where the leather strap hangs down the cliff, ready to carry him back into the world. You hesitate. The rope looks no more reassuring than it did on the way up, but it's the way down. Still, before leaving, you glance one more time across the plateau. You see the goat path where the prince once vanished into exile. You see the bench where the emperor met the horizon and whispered to the sky. You see the altar where hair, prayers, and power were shaped with equal care. And you realize this place doesn't need memory. It is memory. The rope creaks as it's tested. A guard, one of the quiet ones who once handed you roasted chickpeas with all the emotion of a sleeping owl, gives you a nod. You take a breath, grip the strap, and begin your descent. It's slower than you remember. Your legs ache in new places. Your hands slip once, but a monk above catches the slack with a practiced ease. You smile, breathless, and he smiles back with the expression of someone who's seen tourists dangle from worse. Halfway down, you pause, just long enough to rest on a ledge and look up. The mountain looms above you, less intimidating now, less mysterious, not because it has revealed all its secrets, but because you've lived with them, walked them, sat beside them in the candlelight. At the base, villagers wait with bundles of food, news, and an awkwardly carved wooden chicken someone made for the emperor's visit. He takes it gratefully. It's actually very detailed, possibly too detailed. The court officials rejoin him, the entourage reforms, and the journey begins. Back to the lowlands, the cities, the politics, back to the world. But before the party sets off, the emperor stops. He turns, looks back at the mountain, silent, still, unmoved, and lifts a hand in salute. Not grand, not theatrical, just a moment of acknowledgement. And then he walks on. You follow. The path winds downward, past thorn bushes and shy wildflowers, over stones that remember the footsteps of saints and soldiers, and more goats than you could possibly count. The mountain disappears behind a ridge, but it stays with you, always. Now the journey is over. You've left the mountain, the rituals, the thin, echoing air. You're back on flat ground where the earth feels heavier, the air thicker, and the silence, not quite as soft, but it's still with you. The slow chant in the chapel, the glow of candlelight on ancient murals, the taste of honeyed coffee brewed by someone who knows how to wait, all of it lingers. And so does the mountain. You can still feel the wind brushing against your cheek, the damp stone under your feet at sunrise, the weight of centuries carried not with burden, but with reverence. You remember the faces, tired, smiling, secretive, the way the emperor bowed to a child, the way the guards stood like statues and still noticed everything. You remember the silence of a cave full of forgotten names, and how it somehow spoke louder than any drumbeat. Now, as your body settles into stillness, let your breath slow. Let the memory of high places cradle you like a shawl. Let your mind drift through fog, past beeswax candles, over valleys veiled in green. You don't need to climb again tonight. You've already been where kings once stood, and now you can rest, quiet, safe, and just a little wiser. The mountain is behind you, but the peace, that you've brought with you. Good night.